Hello everyone. Let that morale keep boosting for one and only 24 hours Authors Marathon into Pragati Vichar Literature Festival 2022. Now we have with us Mr. Shashank Shekhar Sinha, author of the book Delhi, Agra, Fatehpur Sikri, Monuments, Cities and Connected Histories. The topic for the session is History of Monuments, Delhi, Agra and Fatehpur Sikri and Busting Their Myths. Shashank Shekhar Sinha is an independent researcher and author. In a professional career spanning more than 27 years, he has taught history at undergraduate colleges in the University of Delhi for almost a decade and worked for Oxford University Press. He currently works as publishing director Routledge, South Asia. Dr. Sinha works at the intersections of history and cultural anthropology and publishes regularly in academic journals and books on areas related to indigenous people, tribes, gender, witch hunting, and heritage and culture. With a view to highlight the gaps between academic and popular understandings of history, Sinha also writes for popular media platforms and features in television programs. His most recent book in Delhi, Agra, Fatehpur Sikri, Monuments, Cities, and Connected Histories is what we are here for. We'll talk about it. So, sir, first of all, I'd like to ask, what brought you to the idea of writing the book on monuments of India?
Thank you, Pratik, and thank you, Pragati Festival for giving me a chance to share my things. I think, and I had been, as you mentioned, I'd been working at the intersections of history, culture, anthropology for some time. This book emerges out of my desire to reconnect with core historical issues, basically, which does not mean to say that earlier it was not core history, but more about very visible elements of history, and that took me back to the heritage sites. Now, there are two things which is very interesting, which is kind of links up to, in a common person's language, a kind of a demand-supply gap. So on the demand side, if we notice that generally there has been a reviving and growing interest in history. You see lots of television, programs, on history. You see films, you see biopics, you see, historical fiction. Then you have proliferation of channels. You have proliferation of blogs, YouTube channels. So there's in many ways, and I say that there has been a return of history, right, which has been, aided by the digital media and the social media, digital and the social media as well. And second, that within that component of a reviving of an interest in history, there has been a reviving of interest in heritage sites as well, right? So for instance, you now see in bigger cities, at least, and also growing into the medium cities, heritage walks, you have programs on heritage, you have heritage photography. I also see, pre-wedding shoots happening in many of the monuments when I go out for my, site visits. Then there is a heritage photography has emerged as a big domain. There are a lot of writings, there are a lot of blogs coming up. So there has been, and selfie with monuments, I see a lot of digital media being flooded, social media being flooded by that. So at various levels, with various levels of interest, there has been within a, kind of trend for revival of history. There has been a revival for heritage as well. My own understanding or my own interest as a historian was, heritage sites, which is monuments and museums, are the two sites which are very tangible repositories of the past. You can see buildings, you come face to face with buildings, you come face to face with monuments. And when I started researching on it, I noticed there are two very crucial gaps, or two very crucial trends. One is that, heritage sites like history are becoming, sites of identity politics, and it reflects at all levels. And that there is a huge gap in academic and popular understandings of the sites and the connected histories around it. When you look at these sites, and I was trying to dig into what are the sources that people use for knowing about heritage sites. So books, but academic books do not make their way to the heritage sites, or not in a way in which it is desired. It's very difficult for common person to understand the dense language, of the academic books. Also, there are travel websites, but once you look at the travel websites, you see a lot of same information being replicated with some rephrasing, right? Yeah. And there are blogs, and then there is a lot of stuff on social media, which is all recent phenomena. But two things which people rely on most are the tourist guides. And I was surprised when I started looking at that. I was surprised that most of these tourist guides are trained at travel and tourism management institutes and not by historians. And their primary object was basically, a primary objective is to provide entertainment, to provide an enjoyable experience to the tourist, as opposed to providing accurate history, right? So in the process of some very flowery narratives that they give, some of them end up doing a lot of damage to the history and concepts rotated around history. And the last thing which I saw at many heritage sites is the guidebooks, right? Guidebooks available at the sites and guidebooks available outside of the sites. But one of those things which I realized to my horror was these guidebooks have not been updated for a very long time, for decades. So all that research that is happening about heritage sites never gets reflected in what you see or how you know about heritage site. So my idea was to do something which conforms to the updated academic research, but at the same time is interesting and accessible. And that is how the book emerges. So I've tried to keep it very accessible and packaged with a lot of information that is of interest to common people.
Exactly. I'm sure your thorough research will bring a lot of limelight about these myths towards the audience, through your book. So moving ahead, sir, how do you eye Taj Mahal, a mausoleum of power or love? What is Taj Mahal from your insight?
First, before I answer the question, let me just add one bit. There are other monuments of love as well, not just Taj. So there are other monuments. So
it's actually highlighted like that. So
and the reverse side, even Rani Ki Vav, which is 11th century, is some way connected to how the queen makes basically Udaymati is involved with a kind of memorial for the king Bhim Deva. Humayu's team was on the reverse side. Haji Begum makes it for Humayu. Then there is Bibi Ka Maqbara, which is later. So there are before and after Taj is there. Now coming to the question, yes, on the face of it, and yes, it was very much a kind of a monument of love. It was built in the while remembering Arjuman Banu Begum, who's more famously known as Mumtaz Mahal, Shah Jahan's wife, who loved who he loved where, and she was accompanying him to Deccan, where he had gone to fight some of his campaigns, where Khan-e-Jahan Lodi had allied with Deccani Sultanates, and there she dies, and he goes into a mourning, and his chroniclers say that he started looking very old, all his hair turned gray, and when he comes out, he comes out it with great difficulty. But the idea was to then comes the idea that you have to build a very, very a tomb which is suitable to the love that he had for his wife. And the idea, so there is a lot of thing about how the choice site has to be chosen, what has to be the design, what are the material which would be, how would be surface, and Shah Jahan himself is involved in a very direct way in the construction of this the tomb. And the idea behind the monument was to make it as a kind of an earthly replica of the house of Mumtaz Mahal in paradise. So that was the idea with which the tomb was done, basically. Having said that, monuments are very composite things.
Yes.
So there are levels of objectives or levels of factors which go behind it. One of which was that the notions of Shah Jahan, notions of power was also embedded. And it was very clear, as Shah Jahan and Babcock points out, Shah Jahan's historian Qazwini also point out that it was conceived as a masterpiece for ages to come. And the visitors were a part of their experience right from the very beginning, right from the 17th century. So it had been done, conceptualized in a way that visitors would be coming and it would serve as a masterpiece, which will remind people of the rule of Shah Jahan for ages to come, right? So it has, the monuments have got a very composite properties. And when you look at the surface decoration, it was built, as I said, on a paradisical theme, lots of surface decoration when you see flowers and things like that. And the metaphor of gardens and flower, right? It is not just, it has a deeper, as Babcock points out, a deeper imperial significance or symbolism, right? They not only showed, in terms of decoration, but, the efflorescence of the flowering also, imperially symbolized, the rule of Shah Jahan, the emperor and his governance and his rule, right? And also his court and his family. And this kind of, that metaphor was also used for, by his chronicles for imperial propaganda, right? So as they would call it, basically Shah Jahan was like an erect cypress of the garden of the caliphate, right? And also that under Shah Jahan, Hindustan became like a rose garden of the earth. So the idea was very much there that, they also had to, showcase or glorify the rule of Shah Jahan. And Shah Jahan's rule has been known for, elevating the position of emperor in the eyes of common people. And I'll give you three small instances. The whole idea of a magnificent peacock, costly peacock, exquisite, costly peacock throne was also that, he's, kind of above the rest of it.
Yes.
When you look at it, when you go to Diwane of Agra Fort or in Red Fort, you see that the emperor's seat is raised high up in the air. It's not at the level,
Exactly.
So it is symbolically elevating the position of the emperor. And third, when you see paintings of his reign, you see that there is a halo on his back and people are looking at him as opposed to looking at each other. So Shah Jahan's reign is almost known for power, glorification. So, to sum up your thing, it was as much of a monument of reign as it was about, showcasing power and glory of Shah Jahan.
That's pretty insightful. And as you mentioned Humayu in your last answer, the next question here is, please share some limelight and interlink the relationship on the parallel look of Humayu's tomb and the Taj Mahal.
This is very interesting because Humayu's tomb is known as a precursor of Taj, basically. So what the order is that Humayu's tomb, then tomb with Madhudallah, before that Qutub Minar, and then the Taj Mahal comes out late. But Humayu's tomb is considered very close to Taj Mahal in terms of architectural excellence. Taj is the ultimate perfection, and the conclusion of that kind of a trend. So first thing is that in terms of the scale and magnificence. So that scale and magnificence at which it was built, it was more than just a tomb. It was to showcase the power of the Mughals as well. That considering that there is in Islam there is an emphasis on austere tombs, as opposed to very very exquisite tombs. So if you look at tombs of Babur or later look at tombs of Aurangzeb, they're very austere tombs, built within just small areas. So they were definitely there to showcase the power and glory of the Mughal Empire. So there are, in terms of some features, some direct features, you could see in terms of scale and significance, as I said, but also that both these tombs are mounted on a plinth. So there is a platform on which both these tombs or the mausoleums are mounted. Then there are 3 or 4 elements which become very very clear. One is the whole idea of garden, and the walled garden. The walled garden in Persian was also known as Peri-Deza, from where the word paradise comes into play. So, and there you have the walled garden, which is a charbagh. Charbagh is a fold garden which had come out from the Central Asia. Babur had brought this concept from Central Asia. So fold garden, but the garden is divided into 4 quarters, and each quarter gets divided into a number of quarters, right? And they have walkways and and water channels across. So that was the charbagh, which was implemented in a very systematic way in Humayu's tomb. The second one was the mausoleum itself, right? So mausoleum is built as what in technical terms is known as a Hast Bahisht plan or a Muthamman Baghdadi. It is like an irregular octagon. So it is a rectangle which has chamfered corners. So it is actually a rectangle which has turned into 8 sides. So the corners are rounded off. So it's more rectangular than an octagonal. So that is another plan, and this had 8 sides, and 8 sides would conform to 8 gates of the heaven.
Okay.
There's a symbolism there as well in terms of the plan of the mausoleum. Then the idea of a double dome. So the first phase of architecture, which is popularly known as, though questionably known as, Indo-Islamic architecture, is about triangular domes, then semicircular domes. And then by the time of Humayu's tomb, bulbous domes are now emerging, right? And the fourth is the whole idea about how the paradisical symbolism, how Humayu's tomb first brings up this idea very concretely about, the idea of paradise. So there are flowing water, there are 4 channels you see in Humayu's tomb, which go beneath the, and they reflect the 4 rivers of the paradise, right? So and then you have those fruits and flower bearing trees and food bearing trees, presence of that. But Taj and the mausoleum is placed at the center of the Charbagh. But Taj, had was one step forward, right? In the case of Taj Mahal, it is perfection of the idea of paradise. So even at the gate says that you are about to enter the paradise. And Taj Mahal, the monument is kept at the end of the Charbagh, not at the center of Charbagh. So there is an improvisation, not only in terms of other things, but also in terms of the placement of the tomb. So, in symbolically terms, some scholars say that it represented the throne of the god on the day of the judgment, right? So it has some scholars have come up with symbolical categorism. And then there is whole idea about how it is about, the white marble takes over. So the dialogue between red sandstone and white marble, if you look at the book, the colors are deliberately chosen. So this is a dialogue between the red sandstone and the white marble as well. So that reflects its perfection in the case of the Taj Mahal as well. So I think Taj Mahal represents a perfection of the whole idea that was first systematically enacted in the case of Humayu's tomb.
And parallelly, you are showing the perfection towards the cover of your book. That's really nice. So moving ahead, sir, can you speak about the myths surrounding Fatehpur Sikri, another site near Agra?
Fatehpur Sikri has a lot of myths, basically. Fatehpur Sikri is also because, unlike many of the sites which are discussed in the book, Fatehpur Sikri, there is a different, there is a problem in, identifying the monuments correctly because of description. So what you do is that, you look at, contemporary records left primarily by three, some chroniclers and the Jesuit missionaries. Plus, you also look at the drawings, right? But it is very difficult to identify which, building served where because it's not named, So you identify on the basis of the functions in the text or in the paintings, Mughal paintings, right? Now, as a result of which, there are a lot of things which are emerging there, So many of those buildings that you say, are Jodhabai Palace or Birbal Palace or Turkish Sultana Palace, they are not, that exactly serve the same function, right? Jodhabai Palace is, I'll come to it in a while, but Turkish Sultana Palace could not be in the core area. No women structures where women resided or stayed could come in the core male, power area, basically. Like Birbal Palace, could not be, close to the Haramsara, right? So many of those things are myths, and there are stories which are going around. And it's basically the 19th century guides who were taking the British tourists around the site, came up with names. So there are Tansen Beradiri, there's Todermal. So they are named, basically. But there is no concrete evidence to prove that. The second thing is about the existence of historical figures. So for instance, while Jodhabai, there's a lot of legends around Jodhabai. The fact is that it is not mentioned, that name is not mentioned anywhere in any text, right? Yes. And likewise, the Navratnas, while they are, very much a part of folklore surrounding Akbar, there is no institutionalized list of the Navratnas in any of Akbar's, in any of contemporary literature, right? So around figures also, around buildings. And the third major myth is around, the decline of Fatehpur Sikri. So the whole idea that declined because of shortage of water, and then the tourists, when you take tourists, they'll talk about, some of them will talk about the curse of a dancer named Zarina, who cursed, because she was wrongly accused of a theft, of Jodhabai's bangles. She cursed, Fatehpur Sikri, that the wells would dry up and there'll be shortage of water and then city would decline. But the Fatehpur Sikri did not decline because of shortage of water, but, and Akbar did not leave the place because of that. There had been, his half brother had died so the northwestern frontier has become insecure. So he moves to Lahore to concretize his position, and he uses that position to revive trade and commerce and strengthen his hold in Punjab, Lahore, Kashmir, and the other northwest areas in the northwest. And when he comes back in 1598, he moves to Agra rather than coming to Fatehpur Sikri. And that's because Agra was more suited for the wars that were happening in Deccan then. So it declines there. So, the whole idea about, putting excessive, emphasis on water as a source is again something that needs to be really looked at when you look at, the myths about decline of Fatehpur Sikri.
So briefing it, we can say that the shortage of water was really not the reason for Akbar moving out of Fatehpur Sikri, his capital. So, okay. So coming straight from the author, it is really, many say around Fatehpur Sikri that shortage of water was the actual reason Akbar moved out of the city. But now I'm sure the audience might be knowing that it was clearly not the reason.
You could look at a book, that I've referred to in my book by Nadeem Razavi called Fatehpur Sikri, Revisited. That's a book that was published.
Okay. So moving ahead, do you accept the replica of a black Taj Mahal around the mesmerizing structure and upheld them as a fact and not a rumor?
This is interesting because this was an idea, right? And this is an idea like many other myths surrounding, in my book, I talk about how these various myths come into being, right? So the idea is that, there is a second rivaling Taj. So the first Taj is the Taj Mahal itself, which is the black, which is the white Taj Mahal from Taj Mahal. And then the idea that is floated is that will be a black Taj Mahal on the other side of the river, which will be black. So a counter image of that. And this idea was first floated by a French merchant and traveler called Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, right? And he visited Agra in 1640s and 1660s, twice, right? So he comes up with this idea that, Shah Jahan had plans to, build a black Taj Mahal of his own, which would serve as some kind of a counter image or a mirror image, though in black, and would be on the other side of this. And because his sons were not agreed on this plan, so Aurangzeb abandoned it, right? Once he came up with this idea, that it started becoming, the myth started gaining ground, and at some point of time, it became a part of the folklore around the monument. And people started saying that, look, over a period of time, what happened was that there are two Taj Mahals came up. And, according to the popular imagery, they were also being shown as, that there is a bridge across the river which connects the two. So this is how a myths gain ground. And William Sleeman, who was known for his work on Thuggy, when he started later he came up with this idea, he introduced a new element in that drama. He said, because to him, Austin de Bordeaux, a French, person again, was, the architect of Taj Mahal. So he said, no, it is not about the Mughal architects, it's about a foreign architect. So because Austin de Bordeaux died, so, and because his sons were quarreling, so the idea of Taj Mahal gained, so this is. Now, the proponents of the theory of Black Taj Mahal cite one concrete example. They say that the positioning of grave, Shah Jahan's grave, in the Taj Mahal, so center of the, the interior tomb chamber is the Mumtaz Mahal's grave. So the next to it is Shah Jahan's grave. So Shah Jahan's grave is the only asymmetrical element in entire Taj Mahal. So building on that, they say that it was a kind of an afterthought. But as I said, that the myth had been gaining ground, ever since, Jean-Baptiste Tavernier established it, and then it started taking shape. So much so that eventually in 1990s, the archaeological surveyor excavates the riverbed at the other side of the thing, which is now Mehtab Bagh. And when they dug, what they came up with another Char Bagh, right? So then, it brings us back to the question. The idea was not to build a black Taj Mahal, but to build a Taj Mahal which is between two Char Baghs, right? And the image of the Taj Mahal in the Yamuna waters made it look very ethereal, made it look, which was a symbolism of sacred waters, right? So it was like that, paradise is standing between the two Char Baghs, and that is how the concept was there. But eventually, how things get, interpreted differently, and how they distort our understandings of history is also a part. A lot of the chapters deal, the myth by myth, all this in the book, basically.
I'm sure many myths have been bursted out and much knowledge has been shared. And on this note, I'd like to bind this session, sir. It was pretty insightful. It was pretty knowledgeable for all the audience watching it, I'm sure. And thank you so much for joining at this Pragati Vichar Literature Festival. And we have been honored to have you here on screen.
Thank you so much. And thank you and Pragati once again for allowing me to do that.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Pleasure. You too.
Pleasure. Thank you.